Okay, we are now live. Welcome to the show, everyone. It is lights out for Cuba as the communist country suffers from a fuel embargo, but also they suffer even more from their decades of communist governance, slowly rotting in what was once a vibrant culture and tourist economy. But as Cuba falls, another ex-communist state rises. Poland, having shed their Soviet overlords, have climbed to the ranks of the top 20 economies in the world. Also, so Andrew Yang, remember that guy, wrote up a somewhat hyperbolic article on the threat of AI to white-collar office jobs, but we're going to talk about how much of it is correct and how much isn't. And also, Trump is temporarily suspending the Jones Act so that domestic fuel transportation can get some breathing room amid all of the kerfuffles overseas. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and whether or not that's a good thing. And for Unhinged, well, you'll see. We're going to talk about all of this on episode 530 of the In the Tank podcast. Welcome to the In the Tank podcast. I am Linnea Lukin, your host, and as always, we also have Jim Lakely, Vice President and Director of Communications at the Heartland Institute, Sam Karnick, Senior Fellow, and sadly, Chris cannot join us today, but we also have the hologram of Andy Singer in the background doing production work and keeping the show moving. So how is everybody doing here today?
Yeah, doing great. It's finally here in Northern Illinois. It finally doesn't feel like January 20th. It's like we had a horrible storm. It's been horrible. It's going to get in the 50s today. It's going to feel like 80 degrees on my skin. So I'm a little brighter today than usual.
As Homer Simpson would say, feeling fine.
Yeah, over here we've had a little bit of a taste of second late winter, early spring, getting into the 30s at night. Whoa, so cold. No, but it feels pretty good now. We're starting to get back into it. So before we get started, you guys, if you want to support the show, you can go to heartland.org/inthetank and donate there. Please also click the thumbs up to like this video, and remember that sharing it also helps break through some of YouTube's suppression. They really do not like this show. So even just leaving a comment helps us out too. And if you're an audio listener, you can help us out by leaving a nice review. You guys, I see a bunch of people in the chat. Every single person in the YouTube chat has no excuse. They must go click the thumbs up button right now. Thank you very much for your attention to this matter. Okay, so Unhinged. We're going to launch right into it. My title for Unhinged today is Everybody is Welcome, or Everyone is Welcome. So because there was no show last week, we were all really busy here at the offices, which means we missed some news while it was hot, but still we wanted to share this incredible video with you guys. So I'll give a little bit of context here. During a protest against the rapid growth of Islamists in New York City government, some ISIS guys showed up. Cool. And lobbed bombs into the crowd. Luckily, those two Pennsylvania teens were very bad bomb makers. So we have a video here.
Born and raised in New York, and we want everyone here to stay in New York. You don't get to come from outside and then tell everyone else.
So that was a counter protester yelling that everybody is welcome and that they shouldn't be mean to the Islamists in New York City, being interrupted by a literal ISIS terrorist chucking an actual lit bomb over his head into the crowd. So that's nice. Fox News reports that the two defendants face 5 federal charges: attempted provision of material support and resources to a designated foreign terrorist organization, use of a weapon of mass destruction, transportation of explosive materials, interstate transportation and receipt of explosives, and unlawful possession of destructive devices. I believe none of the bombs that they brought with them, and they brought multiple backups, ended up working, thank God. So, yeah, so that's, I guess, the vibrant multiculturalism of New York City. What are our thoughts here, guys?
That man escaped death only because of the incompetence of the people who are trying to murder him. I hope he learned from that, and I know he didn't.
Yeah, to me, the unhinged part isn't the ISIS inspired, middle class, wealthy family of immigrants in New York City. That's not the unhinged part. That's actually quite common. The guy, Walter Masterson, I think is his name. The unhinged part is how that event, a guy throwing a bomb literally over his head, using his shoulders for leverage to throw a bomb at fellow Americans. He didn't change his mind about his position. He is still a dedicated leftist. And in fact, in the tweet, there's a profanity in there. He said, even after this, everyone is still welcome, except for that goat effer Jake Lang or whatever the guy who organized the anti-Muslim protest in front of Mamdani's house. And also the unhinged part, and I forgot to grab links for Andy, but we did share this, even though we didn't have a show last week, were the headlines and the way that this terror act was framed by CNN and by the New York Times, and how it was just, I think the lead story in the New York Times was how it was such a warm, beautiful day in New York City. And these two kids from Pennsylvania could have been just enjoying a early warm day in New York City. And then it all went wrong. Like all in the, like this wasn't a choice that they made. That's unhinged. We could just make an entire show just ripping on how bad our media is, but it's actually it's worse than just annoying. It's actually frankly dangerous because people are lied to. They believe things that just aren't true. They live in alternate universes. To the fact that this person can actually because I guarantee you that person, Walter Masterson, I would guarantee you he's got a couple NPR tote bags in his house that he reads the New York Times and treats it as gospel. That you could still believe that the real problem here is that people are a little bit, let's just say, not excited about the immigration policy that has been ruling this country since before the 2024 election. That there is a problem with cultural assimilation in the United States, and there is. We're going to get to it in Europe too. There's a huge problem with cultural assimilation or the lack thereof in places like the United Kingdom and Australia and Germany and France. And, this is a real issue, and it's not racist to talk about it because it matters, because somebody who would throw a bomb at protesters in the United States shouldn't be in the United States. What we didn't, you can find this on X, you can find the other clip. There was actually, I believe, 2 bombs thrown. There was the one where he jumped over the guy to throw and it didn't go off. And then he went to his buddy and got another one and started running toward the cops and dropped one right at the feet of about a half a dozen New York City police officers who were there to monitor the situation in case it got out of hand. Neither of those bombs went off. The intent was to have this incident, he even said it, to be bigger than the Boston Marathon bombing, which I think killed 13 people and injured many more, including children. It's a miracle. Well, maybe not a miracle. It's fortunate, obviously, as you said, Sam, that these people were incompetent bomb makers. But those were potentially, obviously, very dangerous IEDs. And if they could figure out how to get them to explode instead of dud, a lot of people would have been dead, including a bunch of New York City areas grabbing the other bomb. And then right after he grabbed that, as you can see here on the screen, right after he grabbed that from his buddy, he ran right toward those cops in the background and threw it right at their feet and jumped over a fence and tried to get away. And then he got tackled by other cops. It's unhinged. Like I said, the unhinged part is not this attack. New York City is, well, as we all know, is a global target of Islamist terrorist attacks. The unhinged part is the way our media just covers, like, these two poor kids. These two kids come from really nice homes in Pennsylvania, and they were, in an alternate reality, they could have been enjoying a warm early spring day in New York City, and instead, something happened, all in the passive voice. And the fact that the guy there he is, that he's jumping over to throw that, this incident didn't change his mind at all. We need to, that guy who almost killed a bunch of people is more welcome in his New York City than the right-wing protesters outside of Mamdani's house. It's unhinged.
Yeah, and that kid was using this counter-protester as like an unwitting human shield for the shrapnel that was supposed to come out. Like the way that he ducks behind him after throwing the bomb. Like, just awful, disgusting, no care whatsoever for human life. In fact, contempt for human life. And our media is complicit in these activities, which are obviously getting worse.
I think the New York Times article was written by a Maryland man.
Yeah. Right.
Wow, that's an inside joke right there.
Well, and speaking of contempt for human life, I wanted to get to this if we had a little bit of time, and I think we do have a little bit of time. I wanted to also share this video from the, erstwhile at the time, Paul Ehrlich, who has passed away. And he is the author of the book Population Bomb, among other academic works, encouraging people to encouraging the idea that there are too many people on Earth and that there's some impending famine and doom if we keep having kids. And he's one of the progenitors of the modern environmental movement. And so we have this clip here, which I wanted to show because I wanted to remind our viewers, what we're ultimately up against and what has been against us, fundamentally for decades now.
Given the population explosion, let alone in this country, what ought the government to do about this?
Well, what it ought to do is this. The first thing, you don't want to put, I'm against government interference in our lives. You want to minimize that. So the very first thing the government should do is try and take the pressure off to reproduce. There's a lot of pressure in our society now to reproduce. If you're single, people try and push you into getting married. Your wife, you have a bachelor over and your wife says, gee, shouldn't I have a nice girl over? The idea is, nobody should escape. So there's pressure to get married. Young couples, if they don't have children, people say, gee, they must be sterile. They never say, gee, maybe they like good wine and going to the theater and so on. They prefer that to scraping diapers. So there's pressure to have children. So the first thing that should happen is that the president ought to say, from here on out, no intelligent, patriotic American family ought to have more than 2 children, preferably 1, if you're starting a family now. Not any law, but just say this is what responsible people do. He ought to make the FCC see to it that large families are always treated in a negative light on television wherever they appear. There ought to be a tremendous amount of television time devoted to spot commercials, the sort we've had against smoking. But the ones in the middle, say in the middle of Beverly Hillbillies, you get a scene which shows Los Angeles in the smog, and it just says this city has a fatal disease. It's called overpopulation, and so long. Now, that sort of campaign, you could have a census, a sample census, which would see whether that was having the desired effect. If that didn't, you could move to giving women bonuses for not having babies. That almost certainly would do the job. If that didn't have the effect, then you could move to changing the tax structure so that people who had the money and had the children paid for the children. In other words, you would increase taxes on people with children rather than decrease them, since when they have the children, they require more services. If that doesn't work, then you'll have the government legislating the size of the family. And people say, oh, that's impossible. Government can never intrude and tell you how many children to have. Well, I got news. It intruded a long time ago and told you how many wives you can have. And there's not the slightest question that if we don't get the population under control with voluntary means, that in the not-too-distant future, the government will simply tell you how many children you can have and throw you in jail if you have too many.
All right. So first, I want to point out that he says at the very beginning, you don't want government intruding into your life. And then examples of supposedly government intruding into your life that he gives are just normal social interactions that people have that have nothing to do whatsoever with the government. that are pro having kids. And then he proceeds to list a whole bunch of things that he wants the government to do to intervene in you so that in your life so that you don't have kids. So imagine though, because he was successful in this effort. I'm just going to say that. Like, it's not like this was some fringe thing that didn't have an impact on people. He was very successful in pushing this idea, and many of our institutions went along with it and did help. So imagine how people born after that period, when that kind of thinking became popular outside of academia, were influenced, right? This is part of the general culture. So nowadays, people with big families especially are shamed from all angles, even from people on the right. It's because of this guy and people like him. So, you get, oh, from the left, why does this family have like 8 kids? It's bad for the environment. It's irresponsible for climate change. From the right, you might get, oh, it's not financially responsible. How do you have time for yourself? You're not going to be able to retire comfortably. These aren't things that our great grandparents worried about. And they were poorer than we were, than we are, right? The environment was in worse condition. So this was wildly successful, and it was evil, 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 evil. So, pray for his soul, of course, but we absolutely cannot forget the civilizational destruction that this guy promoted. That's my I don't have a strong opinion about this. Sam, what do you think?
Obviously, I agree with you fully. There was a famous bet between the economist Julian Simon and Ehrlich. Ehrlich had predicted the population bomb that, as the philosopher Thomas Malthus predicted in the early 19th century, that England would run out of food. What he failed to understand was that increases of productivity always fix these problems. And the reason they fix these problems is because human beings are what Simon called the master resource, that human beings always find ways to make things work. And when prices go up, you give people a greater incentive to fix those problems. So what happened is that as the price of food rose, people found more productive ways of growing that food and distributing it and so forth. And that productivity actually ended up lowering the price of food, but profits stayed the same or rose because the costs went down. So because of the increase in productivity. So Simon's bet with Ehrlich was that you could pick any, I think it was 10 commodities and natural commodities. And within 10 years, the prices will be lower, not higher, even as population is growing. Not the price per capita, but the overall price. And Simon won the bet. And Ehrlich paid. He paid. I think it was a $10,000 bet. And Ehrlich paid, but he didn't sign the check. He had his wife sign it.
Yeah, because
human beings are the master resource.
Right. Yeah, he didn't sign the check because he's a POS. I know Linnea, you're so nice. They pray for his soul, and yes, we should. That's very, very Christian, very nice. So is having a big family, but is DJ Bo, who's a frequent viewer of both this and the Climate Realism show on Fridays, mentioned in the comments that he loves how Ehrlich says he's not in favor of government action, but then he lays out a plan of increasingly draconian controls when asking nicely, does it work? Literally, because when people disagree with Paul Ehrlich, the government should make people agree with him. And if they don't agree with him, they should be made to carry out his preferred policies. And as you pointed out, Sam, that's, he lost his bet with Julian Simon, but Paul Ehrlich was wrong about literally every prediction that he made. He said that we were on the population bomb came out, I believe, in 1969. He said that the world was right on the precipice. It had already just begun, actually. And there was the only way to stop it was to depopulate the earth, that we were hundreds of millions of people were going to be starving in the streets, and not just in places like India, in the third world, as they called it back then in the 60s and 70s, but even here in the United States, that we were the global agricultural system was going to collapse, and hundreds of millions of people were going to starve. And he thought, it's better if we just kill people now. and also not have any more kids. That's more humane than having people starve in the street. Literally from 1970, I mean, and in the 1960s, I saw a chart, and we'll talk about this more, I think, on the Climate Realism show tomorrow. But I saw a chart where in the 1960s, the global, not starvation, but global hunger was quite high on this bar chart. And then literally from the 1970s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, it went from very high on the chart to almost nothing. So Paul Ehrlich was wrong about us not being able to sustain. At the time, what was it, Sam? I think we had 3 billion people on Earth in 1970, and now we're at 8 billion. And we actually have more food and more food security and more prosperity, and we are living longer. Every single thing that Paul Ehrlich predicted did not come to pass. And yet he was still feted in the media as some sort of great one of the 20th century's great public intellectuals. He was a charlatan. He was an evil man. He hated humanity. And as Linnea, as you said, setting this up, Paul Ehrlich's book, The Population Bomb, and his outlook and his philosophy about humanity has infected a lot of academia in the United States and in the West today. It's still, and it's a core tenet of radical environmentalism, is that humanity is killing the earth, and the cure is there being fewer people on Earth. Unfortunately, China really took to heart what Paul Ehrlich said about overpopulation. They did, actually, because they're a communist totalitarian society. They did implement a strict one-child policy, and now they are facing what anybody with a brain and don't even have to have a PhD to understand. They're having they have a population collapse problem right over the horizon. We are going to live to see it. Paul Ehrlich will not. Rest in peace.
All right, I'm going to move us along here, but so we're going to get to another not so good topic. This is kind of the bummer show today, except for the ending where we talk about how Poland is just killing it. But all right, so guys, do we remember Andrew Yang? I actually completely forgot that he existed until Jim posted the link to this article in the group chat recently. And I'm not an Andrew Yang fan by any stretch. I never have been. But he posted a very interesting article on Substack, which I think is worth a cautious read. So Sam, I'm going to go to you first on this, but I want to read a bit of this article for the audience here. Andrew Yang wrote, social media is filled with accounts from longtime software developers declaring themselves obsolete based on AI's capabilities right now. Physicists report the same. Someone in my family had an AI program, that's weird. Okay, someone in my family had AI program a website for them this week. It completed in minutes what used to take a designer or a firm days of work. How many roles essentially consist of processing information and then presenting it to someone to make a decision? Now, not only the process and report will be automated, but perhaps the decision as well. This will result in a great disemboweling of white-collar jobs. This automation wave will kick millions of white-collar workers to the curb in the next 12 to 18 months. As one company starts to streamline, all of their competitors will follow suit. It will become a competition because the stock market will reward you if you cut headcount and punish you if you don't. Now, Yang has a term for this, which I don't think I'll say on this nice family show, but I will call it instead the muckening, and you can guess what the word actually is, or it's on screen, I guess, so there's that. He says, do you sit at a desk and look at a computer much of the day? Take this very seriously. I want to forecast a few of the immediate social impacts of the muckening. Mid-career office workers will be fired in droves. Right now, there are about 70 million white-collar workers in the United States. Expect that number to reduce substantially by 20 to 50% in the next several years. Even a reduction of several million would be tectonic, and I fully expect it will go well beyond that level. Major firms are firing people right now. I spoke to a CEO of a publicly traded tech company, and he said, we're firing 15% of workers right now. We'll probably do another 20% 2 years from now, and then another 20% 2 years later. After that, who knows? It won't just be the managers. It will be all the call center workers, the marketers, the coders, the financial forecasting teams, on and on. Business functions are going to get compressed into a handful of key employees supplemented by AI. He goes on to say that this will impact mortgage delinquencies and a bunch of other stuff. He says that, commercial real estate's going to suffer. Cities will because of the loss of tax revenue from those office spaces. He says that UBI is the only way forward, which is funny because basically every single thing that Andrew Yang promotes is like all roads lead to UBI for him. So it didn't surprise me at all to see that plot twist coming in this article. So Sam, what is it? What's going on here? Is universal basic income the only way forward with this? What's real and what's exaggerated?
I say no in general terms. I think it might be the solution to the officiating problems in the National Basketball Association and WNBA, the UBI, but I think that's about it. Actually, Yang is doing exactly what Paul Ehrlich did, is you take one stat and then you project it forward in time without any kind of other effects. And then you just say, okay, horror is coming and the world is going to end. That's not the way it works. There are everything that happens causes second order effects and third order effects and so on. They have effects of effects of effects. And one of the things that's going to, and some of the things that are going to happen from this are actually beneficial. So for example, he says, quote, the number of people necessary to make corporations function is going to be dramatically reduced, end quote, because of AI. But that's a good thing. It will transform how people live and work, no question about it. But that's good because what it represents is an increase in productivity. And just as you saw the increase in productivity of development of food is starting in the 1950s and on through the 1960s and up until today, as those productivity increases arise, then things get better for everybody. And so if you look at a particular person, you say, well, this person is going to have to find a new job or something. And you say, well, there won't be any new jobs because they'll all be killed by AI. You're not looking at the whole picture. And that's what Julian Simon does. That's what any person who loves humanity does. You look at things and you see that human beings are able to do extraordinary things and impressive things. And we always end up solving the problems. There's only one way, though, that you can keep from solving the problems, and that's for government to interfere in order to make it easier on particular people. And it's interesting that Yang's all concerned about particular people who sit at computers at desks in office buildings. He's concerned about that. But there are other people in the world too. And having things be more productive for them is great. Here's another one. He says, quote, personal bankruptcies will surge, end quote, because people will be thrown out of work. That may be true to some degree, but I don't think so. To the extent that it's true, that will spur deflation, because every time, it's a real simple fact that every time you take out a loan out of the economy by bankruptcy, you end up taking money out of the economy. That takes money out of the economy. Well, that will lower prices. So people will have much more reason to buy and much more reason to invest. And that will increase productivity further. Also, when you take these wasteful jobs out of businesses, that increases their profits, increases productivity. So those are all good things. Now, this will bring on a great reorientation of labor, personal consumption, and the investment in production that create all these things. But it will be correcting what has been an ongoing misallocation of resources over decades because of frankly, the devaluation of the dollar through inflation. So all these good things will occur. And he says, the amount of money getting paid to human labor is about to go down, end quote. So Yang says that. And he points to recent labor cost reductions. Okay. That and recent lowering of the amount of the amount of money that the average household had on hand to spend after taxes. Okay, that was caused by inflation. That was caused by Biden's inflation, and there was only 2 years of that, and it's all over. So again, he doesn't have the facts on his side, and his interpretation of the facts is all wrong because he takes this blinkered view of one thing, projects it out like Thomas Malthus and what's his name, Paul Ehrlich, and then says, okay, catastrophe coming, we need help, and we need basically universal basic income. We need the government to step in and fix it for everybody. No, government will ruin everything. So the one thing that we can do to solve this problem is not do anything. That's the winning strategy.
Well, I'm willing to do that. You know, that's one of my favorite things is doing nothing. So we're looking good. You know, look, of course, it all comes back to the universal basic income. You know, Elon Musk is probably the biggest AI optimist there is. I mean, he says that AI is going to create so much efficiency and wealth and even more automation that we're all going to be living better lives and we're all going to be rich. We'll see, I guess. But he also has made happy noises about a universal basic income, which would be a disaster. But there will be jobs for people in the future that AI will not do. Electricians, plumbers, HVAC, all those people that come to your house to fix stuff, they're going to still have jobs. And in fact, they're going to be very much in demand. I am very happy that 2 of my nephews have no interest in going to college and spending $80,000 to graduate to a job that won't exist. You know, thousands of tech workers are being laid off in Silicon Valley every month, it seems. There's another announcement that I think Facebook or Meta just laid off thousands of people, and it's just going to continue to keep rolling. And, you know, a few years ago, the tech workers in the United States were training their replacements over in Bangalore somewhere where they'd pay them a quarter of the salary of an American worker and do all the same work. Now, American tech workers, and maybe even the ones in Bangalore, are training the AI that is going to take their job away from them. There are a lot of things that AI is going there. I think Andrew Yang has it right, Sam. I'm not as optimistic as you. We're already seeing it now that a lot of, you know, white collar jobs, you know, if you have a job that involves, as he said, staring at a computer most of the time, your job is going to be replaced because AI is cheaper. And as he said, the problem here, not problem, but the reality here, Sam, is that in the corporate world, in capitalism, the incentives are for more efficiency. The incentives are very much, as Andrew Yang said, pointing toward having AI replace human labor whenever and wherever possible. Because if you are not doing that, you're not increasing your stock price, which means you're going to get fired. And so there's an enormous amount of pressure to continue to embrace AI and have people be replaced. Now, the market may decide that this is happening too fast, that this particular sector, AI actually can't do it as well as human beings can. And so the market will decide we'd rather have this done by human beings. All this kind of stuff has to play out. But, you know, it is pretty scary out there for people who, you know, thought they were irreplaceable. AI is replacing a lot of human beings. Look, I got an English degree for the University of Pittsburgh. I went right into journalism. I think half the stories you see online right now are written by AI. A lot of very successful, like BuzzFeed, for instance, was once $1 billion valuation. Now it's bankrupt, and they started going to AI, writing a lot of their listicles and other things as well. I used to be able to, and Andy in the background is going to be smiling about this, but I used to be able to sniff out AI writing pretty easily because I'm a trained writer. I've been doing it my whole life. So are you, Sam. It's becoming increasingly hard to sniff out whether a human being wrote something or if AI wrote something. And it's only going to get better and better. I don't think it'll ever be better than me. I think shows like this, you know, if we could make money on doing a show like this, we would. I think we'd still be employed because I think we're more interesting than some AI bot. But who knows? AI, visual AI movie stuff is getting so good that we won't even need actors anymore. So this is an exciting but sometimes scary time. But I think Andrew Yang is actually correct. And what is going to happen? What is going to be the result? Is there going to be political and social upheaval if literally half the people that have white collar jobs staring at computers are suddenly unemployed and out of money? What is going to happen to our society at that point?
I don't think it would be sudden, and I don't think that people will be unemployed for long periods of time. We went through the Industrial Revolution. How are we going to feed these people who don't live on farms? Well, it all works out because we have human beings and we have human ingenuity. And the thing is that Yang's points don't fit the data. And I wouldn't say that he's cheating. I would just say that he's wrong. For example, he says that that office workers are being pushed out of jobs and so forth. Unemployment is not down. Employment is up. Unemployment has been steady. So where is the problem? Where is AI knocking these people out of these jobs? If you're saying it's happening, you have to be able to prove it. And he doesn't even mention that, which I do, because it's an actual fact. It's a reality. This isn't an increase in unemployment. He says college grads won't be able to find jobs. Already, the proportion of seniors who find a job in their field has dropped to 30%, and unemployment of recent grads is up to 52%. But that didn't happen because of AI. AI only really started to have any particular effects in 22 and 23, and that was already happening long before this. So what was happening is that people discovered that higher education is a racket, and they don't make any money doing that. As you said, you have relatives, and as do I, who are looking for work in industries where you actually work with your hands and do real things. And if that is the transition that we make, that'll be a great thing. But there's no telling where the future will take us. We don't know. But one thing we do know is that human beings will figure things out, and they don't need a universal basic income in order to survive. And in fact, the universal basic income will destroy them. It'll destroy the economy. It'll destroy human beings. It'll destroy their lives. So the fact is that people like you and me who have been in the workforce for a while are less vulnerable because we're in sort of higher level positions. But and people coming in have actually incentives to go into areas where there is more money. You always have that incentive. And so if HVAC is really valuable to people, it's going to pay well. And if college degrees are not valuable, people are going to stop going after them. And men certainly have done that. It's been happening for 2 decades now, that fewer and fewer men are going to college and fewer are completing it. That had nothing to do with AI. Yang's numbers are wrong, and he's not looking at this with a big picture and a look at everything that's really going on. So yeah, people, there will be disjointed transition. There will be difficulties for various individuals. But you will be able to go and find work. You will be able to. And you will be able to do work in many of the fields that we still have today. They're not going away. There will be different things. For example, AI still has trouble making judgments. And so you'll still have to have people who can make those judgments. And that's people in positions like you, Jim Lakely. And so this will all be fine, for gosh sakes. That's really what I want to tell you all. It's going to be fine. We are going to survive this. And in fact, we're going to end up more prosperous and happier, provided we don't fix it. That's the one thing that will wreck things.
There is one thing too. If you're a person for whom the H-1B issue is a major problem to you and you hate that, we're importing a ton of people on temporary visas to work and stuff. That's going to be decimated by this. So if you're worried about like housing, a billion people that they import from some other country into Texas or something to work for big tech, that's not happening anymore. That's
Right.
way more expensive than an AI computer. So I think there's up there with all developments, like with the invention of the motor vehicle, there are going to be bad things that come from it. Higher, very high rates of like highway deaths and stuff. That's a very bad thing that came from the invention of the vehicle, to very good things, which are self-explanatory when it comes to cars. So yeah,
Livery stables were replaced by garages.
yeah.
And
Well-
and you didn't have you did have certainly you had lead in the atmosphere, which was a bad thing, although there wasn't as much as a lot of people claimed, but from the leaded gasoline. But you didn't have horse manure spreading disease everywhere. Change can be good.
Yeah, well, what I'd actually like to see is AI start to reduce the need for government workers, for bureaucrats. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
you know and I
Somehow.
know that that's not going to happen.
Somehow
Their
they-
jobs are going to be
The
safe.
need is not there.
Somehow they're going to say, oh, no, we really still need real people doing these jobs. Yeah,
course.
for real. Okay, no, what they need to do is eliminate those positions whatsoever. All right. So, yeah, I mean, you can't count on things like universal basic income to like pad the landing there from massive inflationary economy or economic collapse. The currency from that UBI itself can become worth less than the paper it's printed on. But you know what's never worth zero? Gold, especially from our sponsor, Advisor Metals. A lot of people on the conservative, libertarian, and even just plain old prepper spaces will hit you with ads for buying precious metals. They're not wrong that they are a good investment, but you want to be careful about who you buy your metals from. At In the Tank, we trust Advisor Metals over all of those other guys, and that's because we know that the person running the place is the best of the best. A great friend of Liberty, Ira Brashatsky owns and is the managing member of Advisor Metals. He has decades of experience in precious metals and is the only person in the physical precious metals industry who has the Commodities Futures Trading Commission federal registration. That's a mouthful, but what does it mean for you? Well, it means everything Ira or a member of his team says to you has to be factual. So there's no sketchy sales pitch or bait and switch. Ira is held to the highest ethical standards, and there's full transparency, which is way too lacking in other places nowadays. If you want to diversify your investment portfolio and your savings, if you're planning for retirement and are concerned about economic uncertainty, if you want a tangible asset that is easy to buy and sell, you can secure your assets with a wide range of physical precious metals by getting in touch with our friend Ira at Advisor Metals. He will make it very easy for you. Please visit climaterealismshow.com/metals, and you can leave your information for Ira and get started with investing in precious metals and expand your current portfolio. Go to climaterealismshow.com/metals, and when you talk to Ira, make sure you let him know that we are the ones who sent you. That helps us as you're helping your financial future by diversifying with precious metals at Advisor Metals. Thank you very much, Andy, for pulling up the website there. Thank you to our wonderful audience here, and thank you to Advisor Metals. All right, topic 3. Goodbye, Mr. Jones. I don't want to spend too much time here, but I've talked about this like a bazillion times on the Climate Realism Show and in some of my writings. So we've argued in the energy realism space for a while that the Jones Act has got to go permanently. But this is at least the first time I can think of that it's being suspended for even a little bit. So for some history here, the Jones Act was passed in 1920 and mandates that ships moving cargo between U.S. ports, say from ports in like Texas to places on the East Coast like New York Harbor, have to be built, owned, and flagged by U.S. companies in the United States. Sounds like a fair way to protect U.S. shipping. We wouldn't want all of our shipping controlled by like China, right? But the effect of this, because the U.S. builds very few ships at all, especially tanker ships, is that oil and gas produced in the United States cannot easily be shipped to other U.S. ports. So that's part of why, say, Boston gets much of their LNG from Russia. So Enter today. Trump is granting a 60-day waiver to the Jones Act to help take the pressure off when it comes to fuel supplies to our eastern seaboard. So, which you will recall, they block many pipeline construction, so they're in a bit of a bind here. But now, vessels built in different countries, like in Singapore, where most of our offshore oil field ships are built, can now move oil and LNG and gasoline from U.S. ports to other U.S. ports. Bloomberg reports, in the near term, temporarily lifting the law's restrictions could reduce pressure on prices by allowing lower-cost foreign tankers to move around the country. Waiving the Jones Act could save East Coast motorists roughly 10 cents a gallon, according to a 2022 JP Morgan Chase and Company estimate. The waiver could also lower the cost of nitrogen fertilizer transported up the Mississippi, though some analysts predict the waiver could come too late to meaningfully lower costs for the spring's prime planting window. So, this is a big deal as a temporary action. It would be better if it were made permanent. It's basically been like a pair of rusty handcuffs on U.S. energy independence for about 100 years at this point, over 100 years. So even just saying that the shipping company, needs to be a U.S. company owned by Americans, but the ship can be built elsewhere would be a massive help in the long term. But I wanted to give this update because it's very interesting. It's a neat little waiver that Trump is doing here. And I hope that it indicates that there is some flexibility at the federal level to overturn this thing completely in the coming years. Sam, do you have anything on this?
Yes, I agree with you 100% that it should be revoked. It's a bad law. I think 60 days is the limit that Trump is allowed by the law to use. So that's unfortunate. We do need it to be just gotten rid of altogether. It doesn't lower prices. It doesn't create American jobs. As you said, it just creates what governments create, inefficiency. And that's the Jones Act. And it's just another stupid thing that the government has done. Remember who was president at the time that the Jones Act was enacted? Woodrow Wilson's wife. Because he had suffered a stroke and was bedridden and couldn't think or sign anything.
Wow, that's a nugget I didn't know. Interesting. Yeah, you know what? This is just another one of those great examples of, you can just do stuff. It's wonderful. This administration has actually been very creative, staying within the law, but using law to implement smarter policies. Hopefully, this actually, as it's successful in its aims, will maybe bring about the repeal of the Jones Act. It doesn't. Just about every law passed in the progressive era, the early 20th century, is garbage and it needs to be repealed. Starting with the direct election of senators, but that's a whole other podcast to talk about that. But look, there's no justification for this law at all. You don't need to be steeped in libertarian philosophy to know that. There's no reason that it should not just be the free flow of goods, no matter what ship it's on. That is more efficient. It's better. It obviously will lower prices. It's allowing the market to do its work as well. There's no protectionist for a man who was many consider America first and protectionist. This is actually a little bit of a surprise, but it's a good surprise. And the faster, the more that this sort of thing can happen, the better off we'll all be.
Well, even Adam Smith had some areas where he thought that the government should be protectionist towards American industries or towards their government or their country's industries. If they had something to do with like national security, that kind of thing, it only makes sense to be to thwart some of the natural free market movements in order to have those industries safe in your country. Like our reliance on China for rare earth elements is a critical mistake, but it has been a free market, semi-free market process in that China just like bought it all. and that's not good for us. That's not good for anybody. And I can see where they were coming from with the Jones Act, saying like, oh, well, we don't want our shipping to be dominated by all these other companies or other countries. But the problem with this is it's way, way, way too far. I mean, demanding that even the ship be built in the United States today in 2026 when we don't even have a robust, despite the Jones Act, we do not have a robust shipbuilding industry. Be nice if we did. We don't. As I said during my little spiel there, most of the ships that we use for our offshore oil field work are built in Singapore under like Samsung. Most of them are Samsung ships, and that hasn't like damaged our ability to control our own oil industry, right? So yeah, and we have all the dry docks and stuff for maintaining them. I'd love for us to build more ships, but obviously the Jones Act did not give us a robust shipping industry like they thought it would. It didn't work, so it's time to get rid of it. So, yep, I didn't
Like
want to spend too
everything,
much time on this one. Yeah,
like everything from that time, as Jim pointed out, it didn't work, and it did
yeah,
the opposite.
yeah. It did do the opposite, and what it ended up doing was hamstringing our own like port to port shipping. Actually,
It
it
made
made it
everything
so
more
it's
expensive.
harder for Americans to ship things from one American port to another American port, which is an incredible unforeseen consequence.
You could
So,
ship from Texas to Mexico, and then
mhm,
Mexico to Louisiana.
yeah,
Is that efficient?
yeah.
Of course not.
Is that even more like secure for international security purposes? Obviously not. So yeah, it's a nonsense rule, and I hope that this waiver proves to people that it's unnecessary and they just toss the whole thing. That's all I have to say about that. But I wanted to get to our main topic today, which I have titled. It's not titled this in the sidebar, but I have titled it in my notes "Poles Apart" because Sam called it this, and I thought it was very clever and funny. Anyway, so we are going to look at Cuba first before we talk about Poland here. The AP reports that officials in Cuba reported a island-wide blackout Monday in the country of some 11 million people as its energy and economic crises deepen and its power grid continues to crumble. It was the third major blackout in Cuba over the past 4 months. Cuba's aging grid has drastically eroded in recent years, leading to daily outages and an increase in island-wide blackouts. But the government has also blamed its woes on a U.S. energy blockade after U.S. President Donald Trump in January warned of tariffs on any country that sells or provides oil to Cuba. William Leo Grand, a professor at American University who has tracked Cuba for years, said that the country's energy grid hasn't been maintained and its infrastructure is way past its normal useful life. Same thing with their cars, right? Except they're trying to keep those things together as best as they can. Cuba has been rusting in place for decades, you guys. Protesters are now attacking government buildings. It's all falling apart. And our usual panelist, Chris Talgo, wrote up an op-ed on Cuba recently. I don't think it's actually gone up online yet, but we'll put it in the show notes or in the description under the YouTube video and on Rumble once it does go up. But he sent us kind of a sneak preview of his Cuba op-ed, in which he said, so I'm going to read from Chris's words when he's not here. So this is the ghost of Chris Talgo speaking to us, saying, over the past several decades, Cuba's command and control communist economic system has created mass poverty for the once prosperous paradise. In September 2025, long before the current crisis, Cuban Observatory of Human Rights issued its 8th study on the state of social rights in Cuba. According to the report, 89% of Cubans lived in extreme poverty, 78% intend to emigrate, 72% of Cubans fear blackouts, 71% are worried about lack of food, 61% are concerned about the cost of living, and 42% are afraid they won't have access to healthcare and medicine. When Cubans were asked their views on the regime, 92% disapproved of the government. Of course, these type of opinions must be kept top secret, or else the Cuban secret police will have something to say about it. Nonetheless, as is proven by the fact that thousands of Cubans have fled the island on flimsy rafts for the shores of Florida over the years, is compelling evidence that life in communist Cuba is no picnic. Basically, since its inception, Cuba has been kept afloat by the Soviet Union and Venezuela. From the 1960s to the 1990s, they received substantial aid from the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR. Were it not for Russian food and fuel shipments, Cuba's communist system would have gone belly up long ago. And then in the early 1990s, Venezuela, under the leadership of socialist Hugo Chavez, provided Cuba with at least the energy it needed to keep the lights on. But now that is obviously, for reasons we saw a couple of months ago, that is no longer happening. So, Jim, Cuba is falling to pieces. Are we surprised?
No, it's actually kind of sad that this hasn't happened a lot sooner. A lot of us, who are older, remember the fall of global communism everywhere except Cuba and North Korea. Europe was liberated. The Iron Curtain came. The Iron Curtain came down. The Berlin Wall came down. One of the reasons Cuba is now struggling is because Venezuela is now gone. No longer supporting it as well. I think Chris points that out in his piece, and I find it. Maybe Sam can speak to this, but I've always found it very strange that even today we see that communism doesn't work. Socialism doesn't work either, but the brand of collectivism and communism from the eternal revolution in Cuba never worked. It didn't even work in its heyday. It didn't work in the 60s. But intellectuals in the United States today still romanticize Cuba as some sort of workers' paradise, as the way society ought to be organized, completely immune to the reality on the ground that the people of Cuba have been suffering in poverty for generations now, and they've been ruled by basically oligarchs, the Castro family, and it's still romanticized to this day. It's horrible, and the Donald Trump has a certain way of saying things, and I think he said the other day in the Oval Office that we're gonna take over Cuba, or I'm looking forward to doing something about with Cuba as if we own it. It would actually be a wonderful thing for the people of Cuba, maybe not the United States, if Cuba became the 51st state and maybe 52nd state after Greenland, because I want Greenland. We got to have that. Cuba becoming part of the United States, or even as like Puerto Rico, would be wonderful for the people of Cuba. They find themselves friendless, really, in the world. And just one last thing I want to point out before Sam takes over here. The idea that like the woes of Cuba are entirely the fault of the United States is complete bullshit. Yes, we may have an embargo on energy exports there. They trade with everybody else in the world, basically, than the United States. If they're suffering, it is not our fault.
The notion that Venezuela was, banking Cuba and supporting Cuba is true to some extent, but we have to remember that Venezuela was backed by China all this time. So just with Cuba, the only thing that has kept it going is big countries trying to make trouble for the United States. And so you mentioned Donald Trump and his various ambitions. I think when he's talking about Cuba, it does have a certain relevance, and it is a reasonable point to make that Cuba has, first of all, has suffered very badly for many decades, and it has been used it was once used as a staging point for missiles pointed at the United States. So and the intention was to make trouble for us. The Russian communists, Soviet communists, and then the Chinese communists. So obviously that's not something we desire to place on the Cuban people, but their government certainly has been corrupt and evil and completely insane, frankly, for decades. So any change that comes to that island is obviously going to have to be better than what they have. Now, I think that it certainly shows that big government, socialism, communism, they don't work. They just don't work. And we know that. They only work to empower the people who are in positions of authority in those nations. And for Cuba to be given the opportunity to let its people be creative and free under rule of law, of course, but free to become whatever they can be and and build things. Obviously, Cuba could be an absolutely incredible tourism destination. It's only the only tourism that it is inspired for decades has been, of course, among fellow communist travelers from the United States and Europe who want to pretend that it's something worth emulating, which of course it never was. So Cuba is it's an example of what a basket case communism creates. The energy costs are that is absolutely dismaying to think of ordinary people who've done nothing wrong. They didn't vote for this. They didn't ask for this. This was imposed on them by the Soviet Union and China for decades. They didn't ask for this. They didn't ask for that they have to eat their food immediately because it'll rot. This is terrible. And you know what, folks? Can we learn from this? Can we finally learn from this that the very last outposts of communism are in such desperate conditions, and that Cuba, you have people encouraging Cuba to do the same things that have been ruining the American energy grid by using more quote unquote renewables and the like. Look, just leave it alone. Let people figure out through the price system what is best for them, because prices allocate resources better than anything else. Let them figure it out and things will be just fine there. But that government will have to go before that will happen. It's not in the United States, it's not our job to decide that. But it is our job to decide what effects Cuba will have on the United States. That's fair and reasonable. And it's also perhaps our job to decide what kind of influence communist nations have in the Western Hemisphere. I think that's a legitimate question and legitimate concern. Things will get very, very, very much better in Cuba very soon if we just leave it alone and let it happen.
It's kind of an interesting thing that happens with universities. There are a lot of schools that will, especially in like California and stuff, that will take students on like university field trips to Cuba. And they get to go on these little trips where they take them around. They show them like, oh, this is what our socialized medical system looks like. And they take them into like one of the special hospitals that the government people get to go to. But they never see the absolute desolate poverty that everybody else on the island is living in. And there's all these, I had a friend who once went on one of these trips and she came back and was like, everything they tell you is wrong. They're actually living great. I saw the hospital and it was so clean and there was like, hardly any people in it and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, yeah. I think what they call that is like a Potemkin village.
Right.
It's not a good thing.
Well, yeah, you would have these celebrities. I mean, Sean Penn his favorite person in the world was Hugo Chavez. He'd go down to Venezuela all the time. They go to Michael Moore, the filmmaker, would go to Cuba and celebrate. I think he made a movie about how great Cuba's healthcare system is. They should be going to Poland if we want to transition to that. That is a country to admire. They're actually doing it right.
Yeah. So I was just about to say, we're contrasting all of this that we're bringing up with Poland, which was also once a communist country under the boot of the Soviet Union. NBC News recently reported that Poland is now among the world's 20 largest economies. So it is now a G20 country. A generation ago, Poland rationed sugar and flour while its citizens were paid 1/10 of what West Germans earned. Today, its economy has edged past Switzerland to become the world's 20th largest with over $1 trillion in annual output. In 35 years, a little less than one person's working lifetime, Poland's per capita gross domestic product rose to $55,000 in 2025, or 85% of the EU average. That's up from $6,000 in 1990, or 38% of the EU average, and now roughly equal to Japan's $52,000, according to International Monetary Fund figures measured in today's dollars and adjusted for Poland's lower cost of living. Poland's economy has grown an average of 3.8% a year since joining the EU in 2004, easily beating the European average of 1.8%. One of the most important factors was rapidly building a strong institutional framework for business. One of the people NBC News interviewed said, I cut out the part that said who it was that said that. But anyway, that included independent courts, an anti-monopoly agency to ensure fair competition, and strong regulation to keep troubled banks from choking off credit. As a result, the economy wasn't hijacked by corrupt practices and oligarchs as happened elsewhere in post-communist countries. So I wanted to comment on that a little bit. So this whole article attempts to attribute Poland's success to like silly liberal stuff, like investing in electric buses. But the truth remains that they could not have grown under communism and did not. And it was only them being freed from the shackles of communism and crazy, far left control that ended up allowing them to get to the point that they're at now, and how quickly they grew while other countries in Europe are attempting to incorporate those same policies that Poland is escaping from.
Poland wasn't buying electric buses. They were making them and selling them to the dummies in Germany and France and the rest of Europe. Interesting. I think you really isolated the most interesting point is how rapidly Poland has grown. Actually, Estonia and Czechia, a couple of other places got off to a faster start than Poland. But Poland, once they got their act together, they grew very rapidly. They've grown, as you say, 3.8% a year is really very, very good. And they've grown very rapidly, and they have a large population. So that's why they're now the 20th biggest economy in the world. And but I think the per capita income is the more important figure, as you noted. And Poland has just been absolutely terrific in that growth, and they will pass Great Britain in per capita income by 2030, less than 4 years from now. They're going to pass Great Britain. And in fact, they may pass Great Britain much faster if Keir Starmer stays much longer over there as Prime Minister of Britain. So the key thing is, of course, free markets and rule of law. You have to have rule of law, as you observed. It's really important so that you don't end up with oligarchs and mass corruption. Most of Eastern Europe actually has been pretty good at that in the 21st century in terms of having rule of law. And one of the things that Poland has benefited from is that the immigrants that it took were mostly from a very European style nation, the Ukraine. And they didn't take the immigrants that France and Germany and Britain and Sweden and all the other big countries in Europe were taking. And that has made a very big difference. So what Poland has done is show the great things that you can do when people are left to their own devices to do the work that they want to do, and where you let the price system decide what people will support, what they'll buy, and what they'll sell. The prices send you the cue about what people value. And since what we want as human beings is the things that we value, you're going to have a happier society if you let the price system determine what people will put their resources to. And Poland has done that. Fast growth has happened. We could have that same growth here in the United States if we were to take similar policies. They could have the same growth in Britain if they were to do the same thing. Although I think that the immigration that they've taken on would make that very difficult. And the same is true in Germany and other countries. But what you'll see next is countries, I think, in Southeastern Europe that will start on this rapid growth pattern as well. Places like Slovenia, Montenegro, Serbia, Romania, I think you'll find that will happen too, again, provided that they don't listen to the EU.
Yep, absolutely. And I would definitely add that Poland's success here has been probably despite the EU, not because they joined the
Exactly.
EU, because much of the EU has been focused on the little policy that we all love to make fun of and hate here called degrowth. And so I'm sure that they're a little bit chafed. I was about to say chuffed, which means happy, but that's
The
not right.
opposite.
Chafed at Poland kind of bucking the trend.
Yeah, I mean, what has Poland done? Well, first of all, it's ignored the environmental agenda of Western Europe and the EU. Coal still rules. They're not going to stop mining coal and burning coal because it is the cheapest and most abundant, especially in their own country, for the economic engine that they have built over the last few decades. Linnea, you know this. I mean, we had Poles speaking at our World Prosperity Forum that we held in Switzerland at the same time as the World Economic Forum a few months ago. And I would ask, I think during one of the Q&A sessions that I led, I asked, it's like, with all seriousness, why are you guys still in the EU? I mean, you disagree with this entire political agenda. And they said, basically, it's all for the trade. We see the EU as it was originally pitched, which was basically a free trade organization and not a super political entity that sets policy for every country. And, Poland is like all the rest of the Eastern European countries. They generally don't buy into all this leftist claptrap because they lived it for generations under the thumb of the Soviet Union. And so, speaking to Poles is a lot of fun because they're based, as the kids say. They just are not having it with all of this leftism. They've lived it. They've suffered under it. They love freedom. They love free market economics. And Poland is rising right now because much of Western Europe is choosing decline, or at least the leaders in those countries are choosing decline. So Poland is filling an economic vacuum. Hungary is doing that as well. And, just one last thing. You mentioned immigration, Sam. Immigration, there's a big part of immigration here because we are told in the United States and in Western Europe and in Australia, basically all around the West, that we need to import all of these people with no ties to our countries and our cultures and to our history. We need to do that because our birth rates are going down and they're going to have to do all the work for us. Funny, Poland has not done any of that. They can apparently grow their economy with the people they have in their country right now. And you guys might have seen this on social media this week. Angela Merkel admitted in an interview the other day that she allowed the flooding of a wave of unvetted immigrants, mostly from the third world and Islamic countries, because she was afraid that the AfD, the scary right-wing party, was going to win. And she said the only way to stop them is to bring in all these immigrants and have them vote for me. That is evil. And Poland is not going to go down that route because they are growing their economy against every expert who says you can't do it unless you import a bunch of, unless you just open your borders to endless immigration. Poland is proof that that is not the case.
And Poland had a European culture and was a very important part of Europe for centuries. And many times Poland was a top flight European country. They were taken over at times and big chunks taken out of the country. But it was a very, very advanced country. So even 70 years of communist rule couldn't change, or excuse me, it was more like 40 years of communist rule couldn't change that. Although there was a lot of bad things going on before that, as you'll recall from your history. But Poland was a great nation, and in fact, it's worth recognizing that Poland really saved Europe from a mass invasion by ending the siege of Vienna. It was Polish troops that came down and ended that siege and drove the enemy away back to the southeast, and that was the saving of Europe right there. So it is a great country and has much to offer. And the culture was a good one, and it didn't get destroyed by communism, which is a really important and impressive thing. The same was true of the Baltic nations. The same is true of the Balkan countries. Those countries, they managed to retain a lot of their culture, and that is something that is a foundation for what has happened since.
Yeah, and I want to answer a question from William Schugert in the chat here, who says, "How does Poland's economic performance compare with Argentina's?" Well, just based on GDP growth, Argentina's is like double that of Poland's last year, which is not surprising. But remember, this is GDP growth rate, not like overall economy. And Argentina started at a much lower point than even Poland did, so they've done really, really well bucking their, their chaos as well. But they were already much poorer than Poland and have done a very good job in recent years. You'll see if you look at like GDP growth rate charts, most of the countries that are at the top of that growth rate are places like, I don't know, Sudan and Guyana and stuff. And that's because, very poor countries can make gains very quickly if they turn things around even a little bit. So I wouldn't read too much into that.
That's why the key figure is GDP per capita.
Yeah. So we had another group that, someone mentioned that they liked Warsaw. I'm trying to find that comment. Well, I've lost it. I don't know if they deleted the comment or if I'm just mostly blind. Probably the latter. There's Ray, who said, "Had a great time in Warsaw and it felt safe. Brussels and Paris, however, we had to watch ourselves." And that's another thing. I don't think that you can really put a number to the like civic pride aspect of a country that like you can walk around after dark and not have your keys in your hand in the city. I think that that's probably a big factor in Poland's optimism for themselves as well. And I've heard it's very similar in Hungary.
Yeah, but Poland is very nationalistic, as are, again, a lot of the countries in the former Eastern Bloc are unapologetically nationalist. And there is nothing wrong with that, with being patriotic, being proud to be Polish and proud of your history, ancient history in Poland. And frankly, to look back at the suffering that your people and your country have had to endure over pretty much the entirety of the 20th century, and take pride in your resilience and ability to retain yourself as a nation and a people, despite all of those challenges. That is not something you hear anybody talk about in the West. And it's the United States probably does that, is probably more proud to be American than anybody else in the West in general. But in Western Europe, it's almost considered, it's definitely a civic sin to take pride in your country and your people and your history.
And we have a large contingent of people in the United States who emulate that European point of view. Fortunately, they're not the majority, at least we hope.
That reminds me, we forgot to do a land acknowledgement at the beginning of this podcast, but oh well. We'll get to it next time. I don't know if anybody else in the chat here has any questions or anything that we can hop on. I was worried that we weren't going to have enough time to cover everything, and it turns out that we're actually going to close out closer to the hour length than the hour and a half that we've been going in recent months. So I think that's pretty much all we have, you guys. Unfortunately or fortunately, whatever you think, you get out a little bit early. So thank you everybody for your attention to these matters. As always, you guys, we are live every single week on Thursdays at noon Central on Rumble, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. Jim, what do you have for the audience today?
We have the Climate Realism Show tomorrow on these very channels every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. It's going to be another great show. We hope to see you there.
Sam?
We have all kinds of great information on public policy issues at heartland.org. So please visit that website, and stkarnik.substack.com, where you can get the latest on what's happening in the economic side of things.
Absolutely. And I don't usually give a little pitch on anything, but I am going to give a little pitch on something this time. You can also go over to Stossel TV currently has a video that I helped to write and produce and did a lot of the groundwork on. So if you guys want to support them, that would be supporting me by extension as well. So go over there, and also go check out our recent video that we put up on spring allergy season. They'll be under our just like regular videos tab on the Heartland YouTube page or Rumble or wherever you're at. So please check us out there. For audio listeners, please rate us well on whatever service you're using and leave a nice review. And thank you so much to all of our usual panelists, including Chris, even though he wasn't actually here, because he did provide us with great insight on Cuba. And also to all of our viewers, of course. We will see you again next week.